we're called to love our neighbor. I think my observation is the church can have a very depleted understanding of what love means, and when God gives us such a clear demonstration of that in the way that he interacts with us, he loves us and he blesses us and he encourages us and he challenges us and he calls us out on stuff that we're doing wrong and calls us into stuff that we could be doing more of.
Yeah.
And I think that has become a real model for me in terms of how do we serve people.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Up Next. Today, I am talking with a new friend from the UK, Joe Rice. Joe, where in the UK are you today?
I'm in London, it's actually in a village in London, southwest London, called Barnes.
Yes. Okay, Joe, we're going to talk about your journey, all of that, but I've never been, no, actually, I've been to the UK once in London. If I
Okay.
was to come and visit you in your area, in your community, tell me about your community.
It's pretty wonderful actually. I'm very spoilt. I live very near the River Thames, in a very leafy bit of it. So you essentially get to walk along the river in a forest. But it is in London, and we have a duck pond with a pub on it and a
Yeah.
cricket ground, and we have ducks and a farmer's market, and it's all very idyllic. It's lovely.
Very good. Now, were you born and raised in that neighborhood, or where were you born in?
No, I was born just outside London in the suburbs, in a place called Epsom, which is famous for a horse race called the Derby. So no, I grew up in the suburbs. I moved to London when I graduated, and I've lived here ever since, which is now a very long time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I was looking at your journey right before our interview, preparing for it. You have worked for Alpha. You started Resurgo. Talk to me a little bit about your work journey post university.
Yeah. So I went to university in Edinburgh, which is a very beautiful city. Um, and I came to faith while I was there.
Mm,
And so I was 20 when I came to faith. And Alpha was a very significant part of my journey into faith, along with my remarkable friendship group. And so when I graduated, I was very keen to dig a bit deeper, and the opportunity to work at Alpha came up. So I worked there in the very early days, actually, of Alpha. I think I was employee number 13 on the Alpha
wow.
team.
Okay.
So it was an amazing job. Um, I was very junior. I was Nikki Gumbel's PA's assistant, and it meant I got to build the database, I got to run conferences, I got to run some
Yeah.
of the alpha programs at HTB, and I learned a lot from
Mm,
our amazing boss Trisha Neal, who's still there actually as president.
yeah, I do know
Yeah,
Trisha. Yes, yes. I
yeah.
was just going to ask you if you know Trisha. Yes.
So yeah, she was my boss, and she was remarkable. So I've got a lot to thank Trish for, in terms of just learning how to work and pray and um, work in a Christian context. So, so yeah, by the time I left, I was head of Alpha UK, and we were running, I think it was 26 events around the UK that year. Um, Half of them were conferences, helping churches set up Alpha programs, and the other half were evangelistic events, which people could invite their friends to. So it was a very, very exciting time to be there. So yeah, that was my early career. I worked very hard there. I was very tired after 4 years, and I think that left me. I was very fortunate in that while I was there, I met a woman who just trained to be a coach, and she said, "I'll coach you," because I decided that it was time to leave. And I realized that the things that I'd become very passionate about while I was there were, well, I'd become very passionate about leadership actually, and the role of leadership and management in organizations. partly because I'd had amazing leaders like Trish, and then I'd had some more challenging relational dynamics as well, and realized that actually your management experience doesn't just affect your life 9 to 5, it affects your whole life. You take it all home with you.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting to me. And I love teaching. And anyway, this coach said, I think you might want to do what I do. So I joined a couple of leadership development consultancies and trained to be an executive coach. So I did that for 2 years, mainly working in financial services clients. But I really missed the experience at Alpha of daily hearing stories of people's lives being
Yeah.
transformed by the Spirit, and just that radical sense of being participating in transformation. And along with that, I think I felt an increasing tug from the Lord to think about engaging with the poor and seeing that kind of transformation in the lives of those that live less charmed lives and who experience more barriers to the things that we all enjoy and access. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And before I go into the next question,
Mm.
Joel, I think a lot of times one of the things I loved about the early days at Alpha, which laid the foundation, starting something from the beginning, even little things like planning events, coordinating with speakers, doing all the little things, setup and all that stuff, really teaches you how to build an organization. So as you move up this on the scale, you're able to understand where things are falling apart, where things need to be addressed, how people feel in different situations. I
Mm.
value those early days when you're able to work through some of those things.
Oh, it was an amazing training. And I don't think at university, I would never have thought
Yeah,
that I was an entrepreneur. That would never have been on my landscape at all. And that wasn't why. I think I was excited by the potential and the growth of Alpha. I remember hearing a talk a year before, the talk that caused me to apply, it was at a conference, and there was this vision to see 2,000 Alpha courses running by the year 2000. And actually, by the time we got to 2000, we were running 27,000 programs around the
yeah,
world. But that felt like a really audacious goal, and I was really motivated by that. But I hadn't anticipated just how much I would learn at
yeah,
Alpha because of the pace of growth. And because we were running to keep up with what was going on, we all had to just learn stuff as we went. And it was an amazing and very exhilarating time, actually.
yeah. And Joe, a lot of times I tell, because even in early in my career, I worked in the telecommunications tower industries. We built cell towers. And I still remember in the early days, in my first job, I had to organize the file room. And there I didn't realize, looking back, organizing a file room
Yeah.
created me the discipline to spot order, put things in order, create a
Yes.
system, all of that, which laid the foundation that I am still applying to this day. And I still
Yes.
tell people all the time, be faithful to where God has placed you
Yeah.
because you never know how he uses those experiences to prepare you for something else in life.
Absolutely. And even the boring things, almost actually, almost particularly the boring things, I think are the things you learn the most from. I had to build the database. I am not wired
Yeah,
for that. And it was a real chore, but actually it meant that, later down the track, I can spot a good job when I
yeah,
see
yeah, yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I wouldn't choose to build a database now, but actually, if I needed to, I could probably work it
Correct.
out. Even
Yeah,
though the technology's changed, you understand the sort of architecture of so many things when you've been involved at an early stage, I think.
yeah. And then you understand the importance of data and information. And so
Absolutely.
if you're disciplined on the early end and finding people who's very disciplined to put it in order, it
Yeah.
saves you a lot of time versus a person who does a half-hearted job. It's a mess. And now you're sitting there, I can't trust this data. It has a huge effect, negative effect on everything that happens.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then another thing, Joel, a lot of times I find is or early on, if you could spot the younger people who are very disciplined and does a very good job with something like this, now you're able to help promote them and develop the skills because the foundation of hard work ethic, paying attention to details,
Yeah.
you're able to see it in there.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that's
Yeah.
right.
Joe, another thing a lot of times I notice is you went into uncharted territory. Too often, a lot of times people want the road built. They want to see the yellow brick road. But like you said, sometimes you don't know what to do. And
Mm.
so, how did you learn how to deal with the unknown? Is it more experimenting? Is it more talking with people? What are some of the best practices that you learn in leadership when you go and do a job or you go into a role where you don't know what the role is?
Yeah, interesting. I think, yeah, I've done that a few times. And um, I mean, this is definitely with the benefit of hindsight. I think you can sometimes feel like when you're going into a role, you ought to know it all before you get there.
Yeah,
And you can't, and no one there does either. No one, they obviously know more than you do, but there's so much permission to learn things as you go along, and there's huge value actually in being an external voice. I always found, in later years when we had a new director at Resurgo, I would so love that first 6 months of a new director, because they would bring so much insight from just asking questions about, tell me about why you do this way. And often I didn't have a reason. It was just the
yeah,
way we'd always done it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so I think as a coach, this wouldn't be so surprising, but I think so much of it is about learning to listen well and ask really good questions. And if you can do those two things, most jobs will are very achievable.
It reminds me a lot of times as I look at Joshua chapter 3, in which the Lord says to the folks over in Israel, hey, look, you've been in this desert for 40 years now. Today is the day that you're going to the promised land. So pack up everything and go. You're asking a group of people who've lived in that desert. Many of the older ones either have passed or they just kind of remember Egypt. The younger ones have no idea what was happening with Moses in Egypt and all that stuff. Now they're crossing the desert to the promised land. They got to cross through the Jordan River. They're going into the unknown. And the Lord says to them, follow the Ark of the Covenant because you have never gone that way before. And it
Mm,
gives you both encouragement, but also apprehension because I don't know what's in the promised land. They're not just going to be welcoming us, they're going to try to defeat us. And so
yeah.
you're going to have to navigate through all that.
And personally, I think that's where the most exciting things lie. So actually, I know when we were talking about Resurgo, I'd never worked with young people before. I mean, we had no experience to equip us for what we were doing, really, except we'd worked in other fields in different ways. But we knew that we could see that there were young people who needed help,
Yeah.
and we knew that God would have a strategy for them. And so our job, with a strong sense of call, was simply to work with him to unwrap that strategy and unpackage that and work that out.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And that was so fun. Um, but it's only fun actually if you hold it lightly. Um, I think there's so important in those moments to remember that this is God's vision, not yours.
Yeah.
The people of Israel hadn't decided for themselves that they were going to go and find a promised land and take themselves off there. They were led by the Lord,
Yeah.
but in the knowledge that they're being led, you've got so much freedom, and you can't fail because it's the Lord's job. Even failure can't be failure to you if you're being obedient to what the Lord's called you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it might look like failure to the rest of the world, but if you've been obedient, then I think that is success.
Yeah. Resurgo was your Nehemiah moment. Resurgo was a burden Why was it Bird? And why did you feel like you had to start that and you need to work on this project?
Well, it's interesting. There were two of us who founded Resurgo. My co-founder, Tom Jackson, who's a really remarkable guy. It was definitely um, Tom who had uh, was working as a pastor in Hammersmith and had a vision for the transformation of that patch of West London, and had launched a whole series of amazing projects like night shelters and debt advice centres and things to really serve the people of that community. And for him, I think the vision was about recapturing the church's role in serving the poor in the community that they're
Mm,
in. For me, it was slightly different. So I had, as I say, never had any substantial youth work experience. I'd never, and certainly not as a Christian. But in my teens, I'd volunteered in the summer holidays for a play scheme in um, on a housing estate or a project in southeast London, which was extremely poor. And I think that opened my eyes to what poverty looks like in London and the kind of lives that people were living that I'd had no exposure to up until that point. So and while I was there, I wasn't a Christian. I met some people some Christians who ran a project in the middle of this housing estate, and I was really struck by their level of
mm,
commitment and sacrifice, and how incredibly effective that work was. So that definitely planted a seed in my head when I was sort of 16, 17. And then while I was working at Alpha, actually, we did it's strange to think about now. I don't know how this came about. We were doing a mail out of one of our newsletters from one of the prisons in West London. And I was stuffing envelopes for, back to the boring jobs. I was stuffing envelopes for a couple of days with a group of young men who were in this young offenders institution. And one of them was a guy called Tyrone, who was really personable and very bright. But we got into this big theological discussion. He wasn't a Christian. And after about 5 hours on one of these days, I just got really tired from, I just couldn't keep up with this guy. And I just said to him, Tyrone, you're a bit too bright for me. Can we just talk about what you're watching on TV or something a little less highbrow than theology? Because I can't quite keep up. And he looked at me as though I'd sort of punched him. He looked really shocked. And I had this moment where I realized, and I think it was the Spirit actually. I had this moment where I realized no one's ever told him that he's intelligent. He has no
mm.
idea how bright he is. Not that I'm particularly bright, but he was he was holding his own in this conversation. And I just had this check in my spirit that actually working with these kinds of young people might not be quite as
Yeah,
complicated as people say it is.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
lingering in my spirit when I sat next to Tom at a wedding,
Yeah,
and he was talking about what he was hoping to do with young people in Hammersmith. And I was like, I'd like to be involved in that. So,
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah,
Joe, isn't it funny how God uses experiences that as you look back when you were a 16-year-old, God planted a seed. Then later
yeah,
on, you're stuffing envelope, God planted another seed and gave
yeah,
you a burden. And you never know a lot of times when you look at how God has been present and planting certain seeds and how those memories still stay with you, unique memories all these years later.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. If you had to look back at your time in Resurgo and everything like that, starting it up, what are those memories? And also for those who may not know, what did Resurgo do?
So the main program of Resurgo is a program called the Spear Program, which is a coaching program for unemployed 16 to 24-year-olds who are facing multiple barriers to work. So they may have a criminal record or not made it through high school with any exams, or they might have grown up in the care system, those kinds of things. And to qualify for the program, you need to have at least one of those barriers.
Yeah.
And it's a 6 week, very intensive coaching program. They come in for 3 hours a day, and there's a team of 3 coaches working with a cohort of about 15 young people. And it's an employability program. So it does tackle things like writing resumes and interview skills, but really probably 80% of the program is more fundamental than that, in helping young people recognize that what they believe about themselves is pretty flawed, and helping them to recognize that while they might have had horrible things happen to them, that they have agency over their lives and that there are some choices that they can make. And also just that they've got a significant contribution to make, and making that will be life-giving for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been running now for 22 years. It's considered the most effective employability program
Yeah.
in the UK.
Joe,
And
in the early days when you first started, was it easier to find people, recruit people, or did it take time to build up that?
oh no, it was terrible. In fact, it was always hard to recruit people because by definition, we were engaging young people who didn't engage with anything.
Yeah.
So engaging them was the hardest bit. And so in the early days, that meant I used to lurk in the doorway of job centres with the team. And as young people came on to sign on for their benefits, we'd accost them at the door and start coaching them into actually turning up on the program. But
Mm.
we'd sign up over 100 young people for each cohort in order to get 15 to turn
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Joe, I still remember in the early days of Resource Global when I went to Jakarta, Indonesia, and I'm recruiting a group of cohort young leaders, mid 20s to mid 30s. Nobody knew who I was. I knocked
Yeah.
on every single door. I talked to anyone who would give me the time of day. And I was also trying to get funding from the American churches. They will all sit there and says, I have no idea what you're doing. This isn't global missions. The early days, I just had to build up and take anyone. 10
Yeah.
years later, is it still hard? Yes, but I still remember the early days.
Yeah. No, the recruitment week was really tough every time. It was not our favorite week. It was very labored. Now Resurgo gets a lot of referrals now
Yeah,
from social
yeah,
services and probation and lots of agencies, but it's still a challenge.
yeah,
But the challenge now is convincing young people that they do want to attend the program.
yeah,
And actually, that's partly because there are some bad programs out there. And
yeah, yeah.
the problem with bad programs is they inoculate young people from doing good programs. And so, yeah, so that's part of the challenge.
I love the fact that even your journey at Alpha and even your journey at Resurgo, wherever you've been, God has placed you from the very bottom in terms of starting everything up and then grow it, and it's time to go. But it seems like that has been your path and how He's
Mm,
used you to do all these different things. When did you
mm.
know it was time to leave? Because you could have stayed there. You've built this whole thing. You're the founder, you're the co CEO. When did you know it was time to leave?
It was an interesting time. So it was almost exactly 2 years ago, actually, uh, where I went away to a conference in California. I was speaking at a church conference. And over the course of that weekend, through a series of talks, actually, and then subsequently at a Praxis event, the Lord just spoke again and again. I just kept going to talks which were about transition and moving on. And at the end of the second one, I found myself, I'm not often powerfully moved in church. I'm not one of those people that is frequently powerfully moved by in a church service, but at one of them I found myself in tears on the floor, knowing that the Lord was calling me out of Resurgo and grieving the fact that
Mm,
that was the case.
mhm.
Um, and I came home and I walked into the first meeting at Resurgo thinking I've got to keep this to myself until I really know that I've heard the Lord. And it was like the anointing had gone. Like for the first time, that meeting felt like work. And I knew that time was up. So I prayed about it and cried over it for about 6 weeks, and then actually one of my team who's a young guy in his 20s, we were in a prayer meeting together, and he said, I've got a word of knowledge for someone in this group. And he had an image. He said, you're working, you've got a spanner, which is like a wrench, and you're trying to work a screw into an old foundation. Well, the language of Resurgo is built on Isaiah 58 about raising up, Resurgoing
Yeah.
age-old foundations. He said, you've got a spanner, you're working a screw into an old foundation, and it's the wrong tool. And I thought the Lord was going to give you a new toolbox, but he's not. He's telling you to lay it down. This is no longer yours to work on. And he had no idea what he was saying, but it was so consistent with everything that I'd been praying through over the previous 6 weeks that it was the equivalent of writing in the sky for me. It was the most extraordinary word of knowledge. And so I resigned a week later, just after our
Mm.
20th birthday party. And in hindsight, I can see in that processing, I remember saying to the Lord, why would you ask me to leave now? We've got strong financial reserves. We've got a full senior leadership team. We've just moved into an office that has working toilets for the first time. Like, why would you make me leave now when I've just sorted it all out? And
Yeah.
I felt him saying, are you really going to wait until one of those things is broken before you leave?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
time. And so, yeah, it was a very precious leaving process, actually. And the team and the board were incredibly generous and gracious towards me.
Good.
And it was, I cried my way out of the building, but it also felt I was also excited that the Lord was calling me out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And too often, a lot of times, Joe, I see somebody who's a co-CEO, co-founder, all of that stuff. Your identity becomes that organization. You start building that organization around you. You start thinking, "Well, man, look at what I could do. They can't get by without me." But the one thing I appreciated is that you were able to walk away and let it go, but let it go in a way that the organization was in a very, very, very good place, and you walked away from it.
well, and I think I realized in that season when I was processing what I thought the Lord was saying, I was more worried about the members of the senior leadership team leaving than I was about me leaving. Like, the
Mm.
consequences of that by then would be graver, because they were running the organization and I was supporting them to do that. But they had taken the reins, and actually all I was doing was putting a ceiling on their development
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah.
So, yeah.
For those who are watching, what's next for you here?
Well, so I took a 6 month sabbatical, and I went to Australia, New Zealand on holiday for 3 months, and I volunteered for a church in LA for 3 months, which was very fun. And I am now, since then, I've been uh, consulting mainly around organizational health and culture, and doing some work with Praxis, which has been a huge honor, working with them on an event in London. But more recently, I've teamed up with another friend on another quest, which I don't know how we're going to do it, but I've realised that actually that's where um, my heart lies, is in seeing intractable problems and working
Yeah,
out whether the Lord has a solution.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The one thing I've heard you say a couple of times before, I love that phrase, quest. It seems like we're on different quests, different chapters that the
Yeah.
Lord has done, and we always feel like there's one quest, but He may call us into multiple things along the way.
Absolutely. And I think I've been really influenced by Praxis on this point. Dave Blanchard there talks a lot about quests and uses gaming language quite a lot. But I think his challenge to us as Christians is that we are to pursue a good, hard quest.
Mhm.
And, good and for the kingdom, hard, which will require some
Yeah,
sacrifice. And he challenges, well, and one of the talks that most challenged me about needing to transition out of Resurgo was when you've done one quest, are you going to de-risk or re-risk? And you see this in the life of entrepreneurs who exit a business. When you exit a non-profit, as I have, you don't have you don't walk away with a big sum of money, but you still have the opportunity to think, am I going to re-risk or de-risk at this point? And one of my thoughts when I was hearing that talk while I was still at Resurgo was thinking, gosh, I have essentially de-risked without leaving, and that actually life had become very safe.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think the Lord always wants to put us in a place where we are dependent on him.
yeah, 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 yeah,
And as you say, I think my identity in Resurgo was really strong, and there was a lot of security in that role. And I think he wanted to call me into a different adventure.
yeah. Speaking of a different adventure, you also mentioned the term attractable problems or attractable problem. What did you mean by that when you said attractable problems?
So intractable problems. I think the things that seem to be uh, unsolvable. When we started Resurgo, people were talking about the 16 to 24-year-old cohort as the lost generation, that we
Yeah,
just should write them off and work on early years training so that we get it right with the next generation. And there was this sense that we've just got to give up on them and move on. I was like, that cannot be God's strategy. That cannot be what God has planned for these young people's lives. And similarly, this new venture that I'm working on now is around forced labor, and forced labor where it's legal, where you can't actually deploy the criminal justice system, which amazing organizations like IJM are sort of tackling that way. But where this what is essentially forced labor is also legal, how do you come at the economic drivers for that in a way that when you can't use the criminal justice system to do that? I have no idea how you do that, but I'm
yeah.
convinced that the Lord has a strategy that the people working in those conditions should not be suffering in the way that they are. And
Yeah.
it's our job to pray and pursue
Yeah.
that solution.
And Joe, you look at the Gospels, right? You have two tax collectors, Matthew, where Jesus says to Matthew, pack up everything and come and follow me. But then
Yeah.
you have Zacchaeus, who climbs up a tree, who invites him to his home, but he doesn't ask him to pack up everything and follow him. He asks him to stay as a chief tax collector. And
Yes,
what you see as a problem and what I see as a problem, maybe two different callings, two different quests. For me,
absolutely.
I find even as I talk with you, is my quest has always been to try to solve this problem of Western dependency on funding, and also the belief that America is the key to missions around the world. I
Yeah.
want to change that narrative. I
Yeah.
want young marketplace leaders around the world, not just the pastors, not just the nonprofits, but these young marketplace leaders in growing economies to suddenly have the light bulb going on and says, I'm going to own my city. And that's going to affect my job. That's going to affect my money. That's going to affect my stewardship, all of that. And it is through those engineers and consultants and doctors and lawyers that if you activate them, they will change and address the corruption and the problems of the city. If you give the voice to the men and women versus, hey, I'm American, you come and learn from me. No, 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 no. You got to help them think, empower them to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that was so much about the Spear vision, was about and this was again Tom, he'd set up a lot of projects which were, if you are homeless, we'll give you somewhere to sleep, if you're in debt, we'll help you get out of it. But actually the whole vision for Spear was, how do you empower people to take
Yeah.
authority over their lives
Yes.
again?
Yes. 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 Yes.
And how do you give them the not get well, how do you recognize that dignity in them and call it out?
Yeah.
And um and rather than being on the receiving end of someone else's sort of um generosity, actually, how do you make the
Yeah.
decisions and
Yeah.
pursue a vision, not in an
Yes. Yeah.
individualistic way at all,
Yeah. Yeah.
very much as a community? In
Yeah.
fact, part of it was, how do you build a community around you
Yeah.
to enable you to do that? Because actually individualism was part of the problem. But Yeah, I love that. I love that vision, Tommy. And I think there is something about how to, and I think one of the things I recognized in, you know, how it is when you're developing things and you're going, what these people really need to know is they're not victims and they have agency. And while you're teaching this stuff, you realize, oh my gosh, I totally understand myself as a victim. And I am totally failing in areas of my life to take agency over certain things. And, you know, there was a whole lesson that I learned in the middle of that process of authoring Spear, where the Lord really had to
Yeah.
sit me down and give me a talking to.
Well, Joe, just the very fact that you said to that young guy as you're stuffing envelopes, you're a highly intelligent young man. The very fact that you said that to him just gave him a vision that he never heard or imagined before. You unleashed the potential in that individual. I still remember even the story where I just talking with a young girl over in Indonesia, talented, bright, but lacked confidence. And the very fact that we said, hey, look, I think you could really have the skills to be a speaker. And she kept telling me all the reasons why she couldn't do it. But yet she was leading 6 small groups and she had the skills. Someone just had to give her that vision.
Yeah,
5 years later, she is one of our speakers and she is making a huge difference because someone gave her a vision. And what you did with that young man is what I hope that whether it's you or me or Resource Global or what you're doing is giving a vision to help them realize what they have if they allow God to work in their life.
yeah. And I think so much of that, isn't it, is about understanding, you know, if we're called to love our neighbor, I think my observation is the church can have a very depleted understanding of what love means,
Yeah,
and when God gives us such a clear demonstration of that in the way that he interacts with us, he loves us and he blesses us and he encourages us and he challenges us and he calls us out on stuff that we're doing wrong and calls us into stuff that we could be doing more of.
yeah,
And I think that has become a real um, model for me in terms of how do we serve people. Sometimes that is, as you say, about encouragement and
yeah,
conferring confidence. In fact, it's always about that.
yeah,
Sometimes it's also about saying, I remember sitting down with one guy and I said on the Spear program, I said, look, I know that you carry a lot of leadership. And the reason I know that is because when you choose to disrupt a training room, the whole room is disrupted. Like no one's resisting that. But you've got a choice now as to whether or not that you're going to use that for the
yeah,
benefit of
yeah,
this community that you're in, or whether you're just going to destroy it. And that is the choice
yeah,
that you've got to make.
yeah.
And it was one of those moments where he was encouraged because he felt like he had some leadership qualities and he was challenged. And the man transformed overnight. And I just think sometimes we've got to be really bold. Well, we've got to ask the Lord how he sees people
Yeah,
and recognize that sometimes there are things he wants to challenge, but he wants to chat. But if I think people are up for being challenged, if it's framed in a way of, I'm doing this for your own fulfillment and potential. And then I think people feel loved in that.
yeah, 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 yeah. Doesn't it remind you like Peter, right? The guy was going to fail. Jesus knew he was going to fail. He says, look, you're going to fail. You're going
Yeah.
to actually disown me 3 times, but yet at the same time, I'm going to build the church around you
Yeah.
because that's not the end of your story. And that's what
Yeah.
we're going to relay that message to people.
Yeah. Exactly.
Joe, hey, for you, a lot of times as you look upon your life and all that stuff, what is one word advice that you would give to young people listening in? A mistake or a lesson that you learned that you said there, just pay attention to this. Here's one thing I would leave for you.
Oh, I think for me, and this was a big message on Spear, is never define yourself by anything other than being a child of God.
Mhm.
Like as soon as you define yourself as um, unintelligent or divorced or fat or stupid or
Yeah.
whatever those things are, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And similarly, if you define yourself as clever or beautiful or, all of those things can be taken away. And all it does is frame your world in a way that draws you into either pride or insignificance. So either I'm enough because I have these things, or I'm not enough because I don't. And I think the big learning for me has been all of those labels are pointless, and the only way we should define ourselves is as a cherished child of God.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And as a perfect example of your life as a child of God leads us to different quests. And he is in that journey of showing you different things from the early days of Alpha, then to starting up Resurgo, to building it up. Then at its height, he called you to leave to a new adventure. And you're probably going to find something else different about you that you never realized. It becomes an adventure that he constantly is working within us.
I hope so. And I think and I'm fairly confident that's true. And I think that's where the adventure with him lies.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, and he remains near when you're an adventure.
Very good.
Yeah.
If people want to follow with you or connect with you, I know you're on LinkedIn. Anywhere else that they could find you or connect with you on?
LinkedIn is the best place. Yeah.
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 Joe, thank you so much. I know we just met each other, but thank you for being so gracious. Thank you for being so nice and so easy to talk with.
Oh, Tommy, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you for having me.
We'll talk soon.
Great.